you had walked into the underground training facility that night, nothing about it would have warned you that you were about to witness a moment people would talk about for years. A moment that would shatter egos, rewrite assumptions, and force some of the world's toughest fighters to question everything they thought they knew about combat. But before we begin, I want you to pause for just a second and tell me, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. Because tonight's story doesn't unfold in some remote village or forgotten battlefield. It happens in the heart of one of the busiest cities on Earth, where glass towers cut into low clouds and traffic hums through neon reflections long after midnight. This is the story of an Israeli tactical instructor who believed modern combat had evolved beyond primitive blade fighting, and the quiet Russian practitioner who would prove, in less than 60 seconds, that history is never truly obsolete. The city never slept. Even at 11:47 p.m., the streets below pulsed with motion, rideshares sliding past cafes still glowing warm, office workers heading home beneath LED billboards, distant sirens blending into the rhythm of urban life. 30 floors above that movement sat the Helix Tactical Center, a private training facility known only to elite security contractors, special operations veterans, and high-level protection units. Invitations were rare. Access was rarer. Inside, the air smelled faintly of rubber mats and cold steel. Fluorescent lights reflected off reinforced mirrors lining the walls. This wasn't a place for amateurs. Tonight's guest instructor had drawn unusual attention. Eyal Barak, a former Israeli counter-terror trainer whose reputation traveled faster than he did. Efficient, surgical, brutally practical. He had built his career on one philosophy: survive first, debate later. Barak didn't believe in theatrics. He believed in outcomes. His method stripped combat down to milliseconds. Angles, reaction gaps, neurological lag. Students admired him because he dismantled myths with almost mathematical precision. So when the seminar host mentioned that one attendee specialized in traditional Russian knife combat, Barak let out a quiet laugh that carried farther than he intended. Traditional? He repeated, tightening the Velcro on his gloves. Knives aren't about tradition. They're about speed. Whoever understands biomechanics wins. A few students chuckled. One or two exchanged glances. Because across the room stood a man who had barely spoken since arriving, tall, composed, movements economical to the point of invisibility. His name was Mikhail Volkov. No social media presence. No promotional gear. Just a simple black training uniform and the posture of someone who never wasted energy. Volkov had arrived almost unnoticed nearly 40 minutes earlier, signing the waiver with neat, deliberate handwriting before stepping quietly onto the mat's outer edge. While the others stretched, compared scars, and traded stories about close calls and distant conflict zones, he simply observed. Not in the casual way of someone waiting for class to begin, but with the stillness of a man cataloging variables. Entry points. Distance between bodies. Lighting angles. Floor traction. Even the subtle hum of the ventilation system seemed to register somewhere behind his steady gray eyes. When Barak's laughter rippled across the room, Volkov didn't react immediately. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve as though finishing a private checklist. Only then did he lift his gaze. There was no irritation in it. No challenge. Just attention sharpened to a quiet edge. The seminar coordinator, sensing an opportunity for engagement, and perhaps unaware of the cultural gravity forming in the room, clapped his hands once and said with forced brightness, "Why don't we make this interesting?" A short demonstration. Different philosophies, same objective. Control the blade. The students shifted closer, sneakers whispering against the mat. Phones appeared but were quickly lowered when staff reminded everyone that recording wasn't permitted. What happened here stayed here. At least that was the policy. Barak stepped forward first, rolling his shoulders loose, confidence radiating from him not as arrogance but as long-practiced certainty. He gestured toward a tray of training knives, polymer replicas molded to match the weight and balance of real steel. Picking one up, he spun it once in his palm before offering another across the space between them. "You're comfortable with this?" he asked, voice conversational yet edged with performance. Volkov accepted the knife with a small nod, testing its balance with a single economical motion. Those watching noticed something immediately. He didn't flip it, didn't flourish it, didn't display familiarity. He simply held it as though it had always belonged in his hand. Barak began explaining as he circled, projecting his voice for the audience. Modern knife defense is about interruption, breaking timing before an attack fully forms. Old systems rely too much on patterns. But violence, he tapped his temple lightly, is adaptive. He demonstrated a rapid disarm on a volunteer, movements crisp and undeniable. The room responded with appreciative murmurs. It was textbook excellence. Then he turned back to Volkov with a half-smile. Show us something traditional. The word traditional hung in the air longer this time, its implication impossible to miss. For the first time Volkov spoke. His voice was low, accented but steady, the kind that made people lean in rather than strain to hear. There is a misunderstanding, he said. What survives for centuries does so because it works under pressure. No speech. No lecture. Just that single sentence. Barak gestured for him to begin whenever ready. They took their positions roughly 2 meters apart. Anyone expecting dramatic stances would have been disappointed. Barak adopted a relaxed, mobile guard, weight forward, knife angled for both offense and deflection. Volkov stood almost neutrally, blade aligned with his forearm, shoulders soft, gaze fixed not on Barak's weapon but somewhere near the center of his chest. A few observers exchanged puzzled looks. It seemed too simple. The coordinator raised a hand. Controlled speed, he reminded them. We're demonstrating, not competing. Both men nodded. Then came the smallest pause, the kind that exists right before a thunderclap, when the atmosphere itself seems to inhale. Later, several witnesses would disagree on who moved first. Some swore Barak initiated with a probing feint. Others insisted Volkov closed distance before conscious thought could track it. What everyone agreed on was that the space between them vanished almost instantly. There was a blur of motion, not wild, not chaotic, but frighteningly precise. A pivot barely wider than a footprint. A redirection that turned linear force into empty air. And then, suddenly, Barak was frozen mid-step, Volkov's training blade resting lightly against a point just below his ribcage, a position no one in that room doubted would have been fatal with sharpened steel. For a fraction of a second, no one breathed. The humming lights overhead suddenly seemed louder, as if the building itself had leaned in to witness what human reflex could barely process. Barak remained perfectly still, eyes lowered toward the training blade touching his torso. It wasn't pressed in aggressively, there was no theatrical shove, no triumphant posture, just the quiet certainty of placement. The kind professionals immediately recognize. Around them, the semicircle of students had unconsciously widened, shoes squeaking softly as bodies shifted backward in disbelief. One former close protection officer later admitted that his brain rejected the image at first. He kept waiting for the real exchange to begin, convinced he must have missed a setup. But there had been no countdown, no visible acceleration, only a seamless collapse of distance. Barak slowly lifted his gaze to meet Volkov's. In that moment, something subtle passed between them, not hostility, not embarrassment, but recognition. The look experienced operators share when they encounter a variable they hadn't calculated. Volkov withdrew the blade immediately and stepped back, giving space as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. No flourish followed. No explanation. Just composure returning to stillness. The silence stretched until someone near the mirrors whispered, almost involuntarily, "How?" and then stopped, as if afraid the question itself might disrupt whatever force had just moved through the room. Barak exhaled once, long and controlled, the way instructors do when recalibrating in real time. To his credit, and the students would remember this with deep respect, he didn't deflect the moment with humor or authority. Instead, he nodded slowly. Again, he said. Not defensive. Curious. The word carried the weight of Ayer's discipline. Verify what you think you saw. They reset. This time the room's energy had shifted completely. Gone were the casual postures and crossed arms. Every spine seemed straighter, every gaze locked in. Even the coordinator stepped farther back, sensing that instruction had given way to something closer to discovery. Barak adjusted his approach, increasing lateral movement, introducing unpredictable rhythm, the kind designed to fracture anticipation. He advanced with a sharper burst, blade tracing a deceptive arc meant to split attention high before redirecting low. Yet the outcome arrived with unsettling familiarity. Volkov didn't retreat, he rotated. A minimal turn, almost lazy in appearance, that caused Barak's line of attack to glide past empty space. A soft contact on the wrist, not a strike, more like a suggestion, disrupted structure just enough. Then came the positional capture. Volkov behind him, blade angled near the shoulder seam. Clang. Undeniable. A collective inhale rippled through the observers, followed by stunned quiet. Two demonstrations could not be dismissed as coincidence. Something deeper was at work, a framework invisible until pressure revealed it. What do you call that? Barak asked, turning with an expression no longer colored by skepticism but sharpened by professional hunger. Volkov considered the question for a moment, as if translating not just language but philosophy. Efficiency, he replied. After a pause, he added, in my lineage, we train to remove what is unnecessary until only timing remains. He explained without lecturing, words measured. Many assume knife encounters are contests of speed, but raw speed deteriorates under adrenaline. Structure endures longer. Position decides earlier. Control begins before motion is recognized. Several students instinctively glanced at their own feet, suddenly aware of how loudly they shifted weight compared to the near-silent mechanics they had just witnessed. Barak gave a small, thoughtful smile, the kind that appears when a paradigm quietly widens. You saw the entry before it existed, he said. Volkov shook his head once. I saw preparation. That distinction landed heavily. Preparation lives in microtension, in shoulders that rise a millimeter, in breath that pauses, in intention leaking through muscle before action escapes it. The room understood then that they hadn't just watched technique, they had glimpsed perception tuned to a rarer frequency. And though no scoreboard hung on the wall, everyone present felt it. The seminar had transformed from instruction into dialogue, one written not in words but in milliseconds. Words spread through the facility faster than anyone expected. Not through phones, those were still prohibited, but through something far older, quiet urgency traveling from one professional to another. By the time the next exchange began, even instructors from adjacent training rooms had drifted toward the doorway, drawn by that unmistakable shift in atmosphere that signals when something rare is unfolding. Barak rolled his neck once, the earlier trace of humor now fully replaced by focus. Years of operational experience had taught him a critical survival trait: adaptability. Pride gets people injured. Curiosity keeps them alive. He looked around the room briefly before speaking, not just to Volkov but to every observer. Most people think combat is about domination, he said evenly. It isn't. It's about information. And right now, I don't have enough. A faint ripple of appreciative smiles moved through the crowd. Humility from someone of Barak's stature carried weight. Turning back, he gestured toward the equipment rack. Let's complicate it. He selected 2 markers, training blades coated with washable dye designed to reveal even the lightest contact. 1 red, 1 blue. He handed the blue to Volkov. No choreography. Moderate speed. We let the evidence speak. The coordinator hesitated, scanning both men for objection, but saw none, only calm readiness. When they took position again, the distance between them felt charged, like the air before a summer storm breaks over hot pavement. Outside the tall windows, the city glowed indifferent and immense, unaware that on the 30th floor, 2 practitioners were about to redefine what everyone thought they understood about proximity and consequence. Whenever you're ready, Barak said. This time he didn't circle immediately. Instead, he stilled, an intentional disruption of his own patterns. Volkov mirrored nothing yet responded to everything, his posture loose but structurally aligned, as if gravity itself favored his balance. Seconds passed. To the untrained eye, nothing was happening. But those with experience could see the dialogue already underway, tiny shifts of weight through the hips, breath rates subtly sinking then separating, attention probing for fracture lines. Barak initiated with a layered entry, shoulder feint, low step, abrupt angle change, the type designed to overload predictive response. The markers flashed. Fabric whispered. Shoes pivoted. Then they separated almost as quickly as they had met. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The coordinator stepped forward cautiously. Check, he said. Barak glanced down first. A clean blue line traced diagonally across his forearm, another small mark near the flank, not catastrophic individually but together unmistakable. Controlled damage. He let out a quiet, incredulous laugh under his breath before looking up. Volkov's uniform remained almost entirely untouched save for a faint red graze along the outer sleeve, the kind that might happen even in a successful disengagement. No boasting followed. Volkov simply wiped the marker tip on a cloth and waited. The room erupted into layered reactions. Some murmured technical analysis, others just stared, recalculating mental models built over decades. One veteran instructor whispered to another, "He's arriving before the decision finishes forming." It sounded less like explanation and more like realization. Barak raised a hand gently, and the room settled again. There was a brightness in his eyes now, the unmistakable spark of a professional encountering growth in real time. "One more," he said, voice steady but energized. "Full commitment. Still controlled, but honest." Volkov inclined his head once. When they reset, something subtle had changed yet again. The tension was gone, replaced by mutual respect that required no announcement. Barak moved first, faster than before, layers stripped away, intent direct. It was the speed that had built his reputation, the kind that collapses reaction windows to almost nothing. Yet what followed felt less like a clash and more like a vanishing. Volkov stepped not back but slightly inside the line, his free hand guiding structure while his body rotated just enough to erase the attack's geometry. In the same breath, though no one could later agree exactly when, he established position at Barak's side, marker hovering near the upper chest while his stance blocked any viable counter. The exchange ended before the observers' minds could narrate it. Then came the stillness. Barak looked down, saw the unmistakable blue mark blooming over his training shirt, and slowly nodded. Not defeat, understanding. He extended his hand. Volkov took it. No applause had been requested, yet it arrived anyway, rising first from the edges of the room and then filling it, not loud but sustained, the kind reserved for mastery recognized without argument. Through the windows, traffic continued its endless flow, headlights threading the avenues below. The city remained unaware. But inside Helix Tactical Center, every person present understood they had witnessed something that would quietly recalibrate how they moved, trained, and perhaps even survived. The applause faded, but the energy it left behind didn't. Instead, it settled into the room like a low electrical current, humming beneath the surface of every thought. For several seconds after the handshake, neither man stepped away. There was no need. In professions built on consequence, acknowledgement often replaces celebration. Barak finally broke the quiet with a small nod that carried more respect than any speech could have. You didn't chase the blade, he said thoughtfully. You chased the moment before it existed. Volkov considered that and replied, if you wait to see the weapon clearly, you are already negotiating with injury. A few students instinctively shifted their stance again, suddenly aware of how reactive their own training had been, how much of it depended on recognizing danger after it declared itself. Barak turned toward the group, gesturing for them to come closer. They formed a loose semicircle, not wanting to miss a single word now. What you witnessed tonight, he began, was not about whose system is better. Systems are tools. Tools reflect the hand using them. He paused, letting that settle. The real difference is perception. Most fighters train their bodies. Very few train their awareness until it becomes predictive. Outside, a helicopter drifted between towers, its distant thrum barely audible through reinforced glass. Yet inside the Helix Tactical Center, it felt as though the entire city had gone quiet just long enough for the lesson to land. Questions came slowly at first, then all at once. Not the shallow kind asked to impress a room, but precise ones shaped by professionals recalibrating years of assumption. How do you develop that level of timing? What are you looking at if not the weapon? Can anticipation be taught or only earned? Volkov answered without mystique. Start by observing transitions, he said. No movement begins where you think it does. It begins in the intention to move, often visible in breath, posture, or focus. He demonstrated by inviting a volunteer to attempt a surprise entry. Before the student's foot fully committed, Volkov simply shifted half a step and the angle collapsed harmlessly. No speed. No force. Just absence where resistance had been expected. A murmur rolled through the observers again. Barak watched with arms loosely crossed, the expression on his face no longer that of an instructor evaluating a guest, but of a peer absorbing nuance. After a moment, he addressed the room once more. Ego is loud, he said, but reality is precise. Tonight is a reminder that evolution in combat doesn't always mean adding more. Sometimes it means removing everything unnecessary until only truth remains. The coordinator glanced at the clock, surprised to see how much time had slipped by unnoticed. No one reached for the exit. No one checked a watch. When learning becomes immediate, minutes lose their edges. Later, as the session dissolved into smaller conversations and equipment was returned to its racks, the skyline beyond the windows shimmered with that deep after-midnight clarity known only to great cities. When traffic thins, reflections sharpen, and the world feels briefly suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Barak and Volkov stood near the glass exchanging quieter insights now, two paths of experience intersecting without rivalry. Before leaving, Barak turned back to the remaining students and offered one final thought. Never mock what you haven't fully explored, he said, especially in matters where certainty can cost you everything. Volkov added, almost gently, respect keeps perception open. And that was it. No dramatic farewell, no grand declaration. Yet everyone present sensed the permanence of the moment. Because sometimes the most shocking outcomes aren't explosions of action, but silent rewrites of belief. So the next time you assume something is outdated, or believe modern always means superior, remember what happened on the 30th floor of a restless city, on an ordinary night that became anything but. And now I'm curious, after watching this story unfold, what surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to share where you're watching from, because somewhere out there tonight, another quiet master may be stepping onto a training floor, ready to remind the world that true skill rarely needs to announce itself.